It's funny how little everybody else knows about the fact that there's stuff under the ground that other people can own that's not the person living there.
My name is Mike Mauceli, and this is the Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're going to be discussing mineral rights, and you're going to discover how investing in mineral rights offer unique tax and cash flow benefits. My guest today is Tracy Lenz. Tracy is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Pecan Tree Oil and Gas. She's a professional engineer and certified mineral appraiser. Great to have you on the show today, Tracy. Well, Tracy, it's great to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I am a petroleum engineer by background and training. Been one my whole career, which I realized the other day was 17 years ago that I graduated. Like, how does that even happen? I don't know. I'm sure everybody listening to this understands. Uh, but
I don't even want
yeah.
to think about how long I've been in the business.
Yeah. The so I started off with Chevron, then went to a independent operator doing some panhandle Anadarko drilling, and they needed someone to do reserves for them. So I was their reserves engineer for about 8 years, through going an IPO and then bankruptcy and all the things involved in between, and started doing the same work, but for mineral owners about 5 years ago now. And it's been great ever since. I really love working directly with the mineral owners.
Well, that's fantastic. I've been primarily a working interest player here for the past, 30, 35 years and started buying minerals for my own personal account probably in, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. And more recently, we've been doing more programs in minerals. And so I really, I've watched a number of your videos, and they're great, by the way.
Thank you.
And as far as that, but I really would like to talk a little bit about minerals because I think a lot of investors out in the market, they don't really understand them. And so if you could kind of give us a kind of an overview of, what a mineral actually is.
Yeah, and we get that a lot. People who are jumping from similar investments, real estate, like minerals are real estate. It's just different location, right?
Right.
So people jumping from housing to minerals, something else, and thinking that they know how things are, and then no, our industry likes to make up our own things. So the the basics of the minerals is that it's I explained it the other day. You know how when you're driving, when you have a drone and you have the airspace conversation, this is the same, just under the ground, where someone else owns a different layer of the earth, and that person may not be the same person that's living on the surface. So everybody comes from a very different like understanding. Like, I know you know this, but it's funny how little everybody else knows about the fact that there's stuff under the ground that other people can own that's not the person living there.
I think the main thing that throws a lot of people off is just the name minerals, right? Because when you're
Yeah.
talking to people about oil and gas, they don't, basically relate minerals to oil and gas. And
Yeah.
I get a lot of questions about, well, what are the minerals?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, you mentioned that. So in most cases, the mineral right owner, they don't own the surface, right? They basically own below the surface.
It's more rare for them to own the surface. It's not absolutely unheard of. Like lots of old ranches where they still own the surface and the minerals. But for the most part, most of the people I've talked to, they've at some point retained the minerals and sold the surface because they no longer wanted to live there, but there was no value of the minerals. And so why would you sell it for nothing, right? So that's that conversation of, well, I'll just keep it, especially if you're living in like West Texas and you sell your ranch there. It's like, there might be something here eventually. And all your neighbors say never sell your minerals. And that's always the number one motto that anyone that comes across minerals gets is never sell. But ultimately it's personal finance and everyone's background is different as to where their risk is, where their comfort is, and where their diversification is. So yeah.
Yeah. Plus, you get a lot of, I guess, minerals that are handed down from generation and over the time, And so you have a lot of new mineral right owners that may not live in a, or may not understand the oil and gas business, or they may live in New York or someplace where, it's not a great value to them. So I'm assuming a lot of those types of people would be interested in probably selling from time to time.
Yeah, usually the people who are interested in discussing selling at least are the ones who it's either too complicated, they don't want to learn it, they don't want to understand it, and they know that they're going to get taken advantage of if they don't understand it. They don't agree with it. There's plenty of people in the country who don't want to be a part of the oil industry. There's people who just, that's just not their cup of tea. They have other things they want to spend the money on. They don't have college, a house, retirement, something that they want to like use that money for. Maybe they're unsure of the future of oil and gas. Like they're like, well, it's worth a lot now, but what about in 10, 20, 30 years when I'm wanting to use this money? Like, will it actually come to fruition? We've had so many cycles, that it especially if you're not following it, you don't understand it, it just even seems even more foreign and risky.
Yeah, and from my own personal point of view, I mean, I think, people can buy mineral rights anywhere, but you have to, you have to have knowledge, I guess, of, well, what's going to happen to them, right? Are they, are they in an area that may get explored, or from an investor standpoint, I guess you really have to understand, is there an active play that's going to take place there? Because if you're just buying minerals in an area that there's no activity, then the value of those minerals probably aren't going to be very valuable to you in the future, correct?
Yeah, and you really got to be careful these days because there were rules of thumb that worked really well for pricing minerals and putting a value to it. And okay, this is going to get me about a 10 or 20% return on average if I put this multiple to it. But nowadays, the wells have different profiles. They come on much higher, they decline much steeper, they don't follow the same trends that they used to. And this is all relatively new over the last 15 years. And so people are still maintaining those rules of thumb, but you can really get yourself into hot water if you think that that rule of thumb is you have a 60-month multiple on something that you should have applied a 20-month multiple to. And then suddenly, I mean, I mostly see this in West Texas where people are bidding too high on things and things are like a good amount produced, but yeah, trying to apply old school methodologies for valuing things is starting to get people in a little bit of trouble. And there's been some commodity price cycles that have saved that, like despite people using those rules, but also it makes it hurt worse when it goes down, right? So
Well, the rule of thumb that I've always heard, and you can tell me whether that's true or not, but if you're in an active area and you're buying minerals, the first well that normally gets drilled, I mean, you basically just get your money back on that well. Is that correct? So you really have to be in an area where there's going to be multiple wells drilled on say a 1,280 acre drilling unit when we're talking about horizontal wells, and to make a profit. Is that not true, or is there some areas that basically one well will basically give you a nice return?
So probably in the areas that most of the people looking to invest and buy minerals, yeah, that I would say that's probably a pretty fair statement because those are the ones that are best known. So I look at the entire country, so I see all the other areas where that's not the case. Full development might mean 3 wells, 2 wells, and it's only a 640, like a 1 mile well that's still being drilled. Like there's still parts of the country where that is the truth, and there's the philosophy of if everybody's going one way, you go the other to try to maximize your returns. But you also have to know more about it in order to make that work.
I see. So how are mineral rights valuable to an investor?
Uh, if you're looking for returns, as in you want something that is generating royalties right off the bat, then producing wells are the thing to go for. And that is one strategy. So there's usually 2 buckets of investors who are looking for, whenever I talk to people looking at minerals, the people who are looking for something low returns but higher than, it's better than an average stock, maybe, but you're getting, pretty consistent returns. It's generating revenue. It's, low risk, pretty diversified. And that's where you have your PDP like profiles, where you're producing proven wells, the things that are actively currently generating royalties. But when you buy a mineral interest, you buy the things that are producing now and the things that will potentially produce in the future. You're buying the entire bundle of sticks that's underground. And maybe just one is producing right now, but there's the future potential. So there's the other strategy where it's more of like the growth stock, penny stock trading, where it's like this is I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of small interests all across these developing areas. I'm not going to concentrate in any particular one because it's risky, but I know that they're not going to generate revenue today, but they might generate a lot of revenue in the near future. Maybe like I usually budget, if it's not producing today, don't expect it to produce within the next 3 years, but maybe like 5 to 10 is what I would. That's probably the 4 to 7 years is the sweet spot, but no one can really hone down on it that much. Like not 3 years, less than 10, right? So those developing areas is where I think people can really get the most return. But again, you really have to be in it because you have to scatter that interest across multiple different areas. You have to know where it's expanding. You have to be able to pick it up and manage it. Make sure you're not missing things as they come online. It's much more of an active management profile, even though you're not actually operating the wells. So that's kind of the two strategies I see.
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard these horror stories. I've talked to people that say, well, I go out on the EnergyNet website and I just buy minerals, without really knowing anything about oil and gas. And I try to tell people that, that's not really the way to go about doing it. I mean, someone like that should work with someone like yourself that understands the business and basically can determine, what kind of reserves are left. Are there other potentials, that will eventually be drilled, whether it be drilled horizontal or whether it be drilled vertical. I guess about 95% of the wells drilled today in the U.S. are probably horizontal wells. So, do you look at those types of scenarios when people come to you to buy minerals?
Yeah, so it's always funny to look at the number of rigs drilling verticals. I'm always still surprised the number of vertical wells being drilled. But yeah, from a volume standpoint, 100% horizontal. Yeah, you are 100% correct. It's like 95. Yeah. The
So what are the
yeah, I have to
I
think
guess
about that one.
benefits of investing in oil and gas? I mean, oil and gas minerals, excuse me.
What was that?
I said, what are the benefits for an investor that invest in mineral rights?
So one of the benefits that I see as both a pro and a con. I mean, for the investor, I think it's a pro, but for the industry, I think it kind of shines an interesting light. We'll just say is that it has historically pretty good returns because it's a pretty opaque market. There's not a lot of visibility as to what's listed, when things are listed. Like if you know the right people, if you get in the right circles, it's like buying in a hot subdivision where you have to know the person who's going to list it for sale before it goes for sale, and then you can get the great house on the street. But if you don't, you're unlikely to get anything really great. But if you are part of those circles, the returns are really high because there's so much. You're buying from people that don't know the same amount about it as you do usually, because the people who are buying usually are doing this more than once. Like it's usually a strategy, either at a company or you're going through a broker or a buyer. It's something that they're very familiar with, and you're buying from individuals who they may not have ever had any education on the oil industry ever. They might have just inherited it. So the nature of that is the chances of things selling for under market value is high because market value assumes that both sides of the table know the same thing, and that it's arm's length, and you're able to fairly negotiate and fairly market it, and all the things that you would do if you were selling your house, right? And that just rarely happens with minerals. So the likelihood that I always tell sellers, like the likelihood that you're gonna like happen to find the person that wants to buy it for like the great like market value price is pretty low if you aren't casting a really wide net and you're like in it working it. And similarly from the buyer side, if you're not employing those strategies and like in the industry, it's kind of a hard game to get into. So going through the professionals and going through the networks, that has been historically the way to go about getting good deals. But when you do that, you do get good deals.
So how are mineral rights taxed?
So generally, first of all, I'm an engineer, not a CPA, so I like to like put that out there first. I do get a lot of tax related appraisal questions because that's usually when people really know they need an appraisal, that they need to know the value for tax, like the IRS is asking. It's taxed like property that you don't live at. So like a vacation home, if you want to think about it like that. And so if you inherit it, you can do a stepped up capital basis, stepped up basis for capital gains if you were to sell it in the future. And just like any other property, I believe, if you inherit, and then if you purchase it, it's like you're purchasing a property, like a home. So the royalties that are generated off of that is treated like income. Like it's just normal income that it's whatever tax bracket you're in, I believe. And then then it's that balance of, is it generating royalties now? Am I funneling that back into, there's lots of strategies for where you're putting that entity, like the minerals into an entity, maybe like a limited partnership or an LLC or I know LLCs aren't tax related, but it's all the things that you can do to manage where that income's going. If you're sharing it with family members or trying to make it to where there's not a taxable event, there's lots of interesting strategies I've seen employed for managing both the taxable events when someone passes away, and there's some states have estate taxes on those things, or gift taxing if you want to give it from one person to another. There's lots of strategies, but generally just thinking of it as real estate is the best one to go about.
And do you have a simplified way of explaining, what a net royalty acre is or a mineral acre? I mean, I always get confused, when you're looking at that type of stuff. I don't know if there is an easy way to explain it, but that's how you trade minerals, right? In most cases.
Yeah. So the way that I've seen click the best, and first you have to make sure that everybody's using the same definition first. If someone's talking net royalty acres, because we like to make up our own things in this industry. That was the first thing, right?
Yeah.
So checking that they're using the same definition that you're familiar with. But generally the definition is that a gross acre is the one that's on your deed, and it's the, if you were to put a fence around the property that's described on the deed or on the lease, usually that's if you do see a number of acres, that's the gross number of acres on the lease. That is if you put a fence around it. If you look at it from Google Maps top down, that's how much sod you'd have to buy, right, to cover it. Now, if the net acreage, because minerals, you're not living on it, multiple people can own it. Like if multiple people owned my home, that'd be weird. But if multiple people can own minerals, because you just own a percentage of it, then I own 1%, 10%, 100%. So the net part of it it's almost like stock in a company. And so if you think of, I own X amount of shares of Google, if I owned 10% of the shares of Google, I don't own all of Google, but I own 10% of all of Google. So it's the net acreage is how much of my piece of the pie of the whole thing am I getting. So if a well anywhere on that property produces $100 of oil, you would get $10 if you had 10 net acres, or of the 100 acres, or 10% of it. So the net royalty side of it, then the people like to convert it even more to royalty acres, because the lease rate that it's leased at, because most mineral owners aren't developing their own things. They don't want to put millions of dollars into drill these wells. The leasing side of it also affects what the value is. So if if you lease your minerals for 12.5%, you're going to get half the money as if you lease it for 25%. So the lease royalty rate is the next conversion step. So net royalty acres converts it all usually down to 12.5% for apples to apples.
And when you buy these minerals, you own them, right? And do you own all of the minerals under the land, or just all the oil and gas part of it?
So there's a lot of caveats to that, like all things. Um, it depends on, like, you might own just certain depths if other depths have been severed. They call it, like, if maybe one person sold everything below 3,000 feet but kept the, you just have to go back and check title because it's not always clear. So like make sure that the person is actually selling all depths of the end of the minerals. You can also reserve certain types of minerals. Like I'm selling everything but the oil and gas interest, or I'm only selling the oil and gas mineral interest. And then if there's other hard minerals or other mineral like this, the lithium brine stuff that's happened, like that's a question that's coming up. Like, is that part of the water rights or is that part of the mineral rights? Like there's because the water has this, most states, every state's different too. So most states consider the water part of the surface estate, not the mineral estate. So, and the pore space itself, like the space in the rock that the oil and gas is in, who owns that? Like that's not a mineral, that's empty air. So, like the CO2 storage or any of the any storage effect, like questions like that is uncertain as to who owns it. But the generally any precious minerals, and there's usually a definition that each state uses when someone just generally says minerals. But yeah.
So basically, what you're saying is, I mean, you really need to try to work with a professional that, when you go to buy these minerals, because you may not own what you think you own, right? I
Mhm.
mean, somebody goes out and discovers gold out there, even though it's a mineral, you may not own it.
Yeah, and usually if it's an area where there's something going on, it's been considered like in previous transactions. So if you're in an area that there's a lot of oil and gas production, usually oil and gas is handled in the title. But if you're in an area where there's not a lot of coal mining, people might not have ever mentioned coal. So yeah, yeah. And then
And
yeah, go
I mean,
ahead.
I guess when you're purchasing land, you need to, in a lot of cases, the minerals don't come along with the surface, right? So you need, if you're basically buying a piece of land, you would want to know whether you're getting the mineral rights or not.
Yeah, and the default is that it would go with it. If you don't say, if no one, if the person selling it to you doesn't say they're reserving it. But the thing you got to check is the chain of title, like the person before that and before that and before that. Did anybody reserve it down the line? And so, like chaining it all the way back to the patent the first land, that is very common, if not mandatory, for our industry. There's also some states to be aware of that if you don't do certain things under a certain timeline, it reverts back to the surface owner. So I don't have those where I can recite them off the top of my head, but just be aware there are some states where it reverts to the surface owner after a certain amount of time.
Oh, okay.
Or if you don't pay your taxes on it, like different states handle like, are you taxed on the property itself? So you have to pay severance tax, which is like an income tax basically. But some states have a property tax on it also. And so if you don't pay that property tax, which is called ad valorem in most cases, if you don't pay that ad valorem to the county, like what happens then? So, because essentially the same thing would happen if you didn't pay your taxes on your house, like the county takes it, so puts a lien on it. Or there's sheriff auctions for things that weren't. There's a lot of caveats for if you're buying, especially distressed minerals.
I see. And in most cases, if you're buying in I say a producing area, then the mineral rights will always have some value, correct? I mean, or is there times when there's just no value to them? How you bought something and basically the well depleted, and you still own the minerals, I guess, at that point. But but the value obviously is less than it was when you purchased it.
Hmm. Yeah, there's areas where, uh, especially if there's not drilling rigs within like 30 or 40 miles, that might be a good rule of thumb. If you don't see any signs of new wells or new activity, new production, then as soon as the wells that are producing on the property are done and depleted and no longer producing, then it's pretty fair to expect that your mineral value will probably go down to under $100 per acre, if like net acre, if not less. It really depends on what's going on in the area, how much speculation is happening, if there's leasing. Like there's a lot of things that are interesting to look at, but
But on
yeah,
the opposite side, if you're in an area where all of a sudden there's a new play discovered, then the value of your minerals are going to go up, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, obviously that's where you want to be, I guess, as far as that. So can it's been great having you on the show today, and I love your videos. But can you tell our listeners how to follow you?
Yeah, sure. So on YouTube, we are Pecan Tree Oil and Gas, or Pecan Tree OG is our handle. You could just search for Tracy Lenz. I think my channel is officially under that. Also, our website is pecanestimate.com. We're a third party evaluator. That's what I do for a living, is value stuff all across the country. So you can come look to see different areas on that website, and that's also how you get in touch with our team if you need a more detailed valuation.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back in the future. Mineral right investing is very interesting, and we didn't even dive into 1031 tax-free exchanges or.
I said I'm not a tax person.
I know a lot of
But
people.
yeah,
We've done a lot of those, so I know that really gets into as far as a different aspect of it. But anyway,
yep.
I'd love to have you back in the future, and thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.